Welcome to Choosing to Matter Cocktails with Chris, a space for open, honest, and unhurried conversations. In today's episode, we sit down with someone who's shaping our world with purpose and passion. I'm your host, Chris Lubkeman. Join me as we explore how our guest has chosen and chooses to matter. So hello, everybody, and welcome to today's podcast, Choosing to Matter. And my guest today is Russell Galt. And we have invited Russell because he is one of those who is truly redefining how we understand the relationship between nature and our economies. So, Russell, welcome to the pod.
Thank you very much, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So tell me something, Russell. What do the listeners need to know about you? How do you introduce yourself?
Well, firstly, I'm an ecologist with a lifelong passion for the natural world. I'm a consultant and I am a sustainability strategist. So I'm very much embedded in the environment sector. Over my 20-year career, I've worked on urban development, reintegrating cities into nature into cities. I've also worked on biodiversity informatics, on environmental communications campaigns, global campaigns, and most recently, I've been working in the voluntary carbon market. So that's a very concise summary of my career to date. It's been incredibly rewarding, and I consider myself very fortunate to be working for what I consider to be a meaningful cause.
That's really fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Russell. And I look forward to learning more. I think we all look forward to learning more about that journey. It's quite a big one. Now, the subtitle of our podcast is Cocktails with Chris. And you have shared with us that your favorite cocktail is a whiskey. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. A whiskey. So I'm a bagpiper, and I remember as a young boy, my piping teacher advised me that I mustn't do drugs and I mustn't smoke. He said, dinna smoke, dinna do drugs, but a wee dram now and then will nae do you no harm. And I have perhaps taken that literally and always enjoyed a wee dram from time to time. Never overdoing it, of course, but there is something unimitable about whiskey. And in particular, Talisker. Talisker for me is capturing a very special place on the Isle of Skye. You can taste the sea breeze, the kelp, the natural splendor of Skye. And it's also a whiskey that I attach to a personal memory of going on a fishing holiday with my younger brother and father up in the north of Sweden and catching salmon galore. And yeah, I forever enjoyed it. And there is something very special about the water of life, whiskey va, which is the Gaelic name, of course. And it's very much imbued in our Scottish culture.
It's a thank you for sharing that story and the relationship. I have here a Fife Arms from Bremer. I'm not sure how you rate that compared to your Talisker, but how do you rate it compared to yours?
Well, I must admit, I've never sampled the Fife Arms. I think the Fife Arms is a fancy hotel somewhere in the Highlands. It's not actually in Fife, insofar as I'm aware. So I've never tried it. I can't compare. But me, personally, I like the smoky whiskies, the peaty whiskies.
Yeah. This isn't smoky. But listen, Russell, let us toast. Let us toast to our stories. Maybe toast to our stories.
It's good to be here. Slàinte, as we would say in Scotland.
Oof. Nice. I appreciate it. Oh, that is smooth, I have to say. I really have to like that. So Russell, let's go back to when you were, say, a teenager. What was your future going to be?
Well, growing up in Scotland, I attended a boarding school in the Perthshire Hills, which is a beautiful part of Scotland, surrounded by stunning mountains and hills and rivers and forests. And I spent a lot of my time outdoors, stuck in the mud, playing rugby, running around, cycling in the summer. And it was all very much part of my upbringing. And I
Right.
never really considered that conservation was a credible career path. And I
Hmm.
never really knew what I wanted to do. I mean, when I was 18, I think I was, like most young men, a bit lost and confused, probably a little self-obsessed, I think it's fair to say as well. But
Sure.
an amazing opportunity arose when I left school and I had the privilege of studying towards FAGASA qualification in South Africa, which is the Field Guide Association of South Africa, as a game ranger. And I spent
Huh.
1 month at a place called Maholo Hollow, which is a wildlife rehabilitation center. I think translated in the from Sepedi into English, it means the Great Spirit, which is a very apt name, considering I had something I would consider a spiritual revelation there. And it really opened my eyes to the wonders of nature, to the intricate long chains of interaction. And I realized then and there that I want to become a conservationist. And at the
Hmm.
time, I didn't really think it was, as I said, a credible career path. I wasn't aware of conservationists making a living off that. But I did have a very heartfelt and real yearning to be immersed in nature and to dedicate my life from a young age to conserving it.
That's incredible. I mean, it's really so this pull of nature. What about nature pulled you? What when you think back now,
Yeah.
what was this? What was it? Or what is it?
I think there's something incredibly humbling about nature, the vastness of it, the uh,
Hmm.
incredible, infinite complexity of it. And I think it's very healthy to spend time in nature. It gives us a sense of place in space and in time, a sense of perspective, which is very, very healthy. And for me, going out to South Africa at a young age, and I then went to undertake a 6 month traineeship at a game reserve called Makalali, which means the place of rest. It was anything but the place of rest. It was a busy time. And I had the opportunity to track, observe, and monitor a clan of hyenas over a 6 month period. And we watched them as they hunted at night. We followed them into the bush. We watched them kill and bring down wildebeest and be chased away from their kill by lions.
Hmm.
We watched them as they birthed several cubs, a litter of cubs, very cute little black hyenas. And for me, that was a spellbinding experience. And when you're in
Hmm.
the bush, immersed in wilderness, all your senses come alive. They're at the very least being exercised continuously. The smells and the sounds and the sights. And for me, it was a very tactile and immersive experience. And I can only describe it as a physical joy, a physical pleasure that
Hmm.
I exacted from spending time immersed in wilderness. I found it incredibly calming. And I immediately knew that this is something worth preserving. And, it's a
Okay.
messy old world, isn't it? It's confusing. One can take positions on either side of the aisle on all manner of issues. But when it comes to nature conservation, this is a fundamental beauty and a fundamental truth which I know is worth working for, the preservation of nature.
Mhm.
And for me, it's almost a rhetorical question to ask, should we save nature? Of course we should. And not just because of all the ecosystem services, the benefits and products that we receive, but also because I think it has a sort of sacred inherent value which we ought to conserve.
I appreciate that very much, Russell. And it's fascinating to me how science confirms this in many ways and says that when you walk for 3 minutes, after 3 minutes, just walking in nature, your body begins to change. It's just a short period of time. We react to nature, and be it in a city park or in the deep wilds of the jungle.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When I reflect on my own life, and I've been very fortunate to travel to some of the most spectacular wilderness areas that still exist. And without doubt, if I were to measure up my life as intensive experiences in a long span of time, it's the times I've been in nature. When I've literally been hiding behind a tree, listening to a tiger in Chitwan National Park, um, purring loudly and walking 20 meters away from us. It's times when I've heard the cackling of hyenas and the screeches in the bush, and then gone out at night and found lions and hyenas tussling over a wildebeest. It's times also when I've been on the Fife coastal path closer to home and gazing out across the North Sea under a splendid sky. And these are the moments that I cherish. And I think there's something very, very important about religious, almost a quasi-religious importance that allows us a sense of peace, of refuge, a place where we can go and collect our thoughts.
Sure.
And contemplate in ways that are not possible in the big bustling city indoors. Perhaps they should be, if we design better parks, if we design better cities. But currently there's no parallel for me than being outside in nature, and I think increasingly doctors are recognizing that.
Yeah, I hear you very much. So let me ask you something that I love that journey, and speaking because that echoes and resonates with me personally a lot, Russell. I mean, nature is my inspirational place as well. And whether it's just sitting in a field, just looking at the grass, or looking at the beautiful mountains of Switzerland, that is really for me. Yeah. But how would you describe to your grandparents what you do professionally today?
Yeah, I guess the world of work has changed so fundamentally, hasn't it, that it would almost be unrecognizable to what they did back then. Exactly. So my grandfather was an artist. So actually, he spent a lot of time outdoors in nature, painting landscapes across the west coast of Scotland. My other grandfather was a sort of entrepreneur, eventually chartered yachts, and spent much of his life sailing around the Hebrides of Scotland, the islands. But if they saw what I was doing today, sorry, my grandmothers did not work, I should clarify that. But if they saw what I was doing today, they
worked at home. They worked at home.
Very important point.
Yes.
I remember Kate Raworth's book when she looked at the life of Adam Smith, the great economist, who actually was born in Kirkcaldy, just a few miles down the coast here. And she pointed out that he never credited his mother, with whom he stayed for many years whilst writing The Wealth of Nations. He never credited his mother, who cooked 3 meals a day for him. So yes, the work of women as homekeepers must not be forgotten. And both my grandmothers were very busy homekeepers, that must be said. But yeah, I think they would probably look at me today and think, what on earth is he doing? Conservation back then was very hands-on. You'd be out in the field planting trees, perhaps conducting research. Nowadays, a lot of the work in the conservation sector is digitized, and it happens indoors, staring at a screen, rightly or wrongly. And as much as I like to get outside into nature, I do spend a lot of my waking hours on a laptop.
So tell me more about that. I mean, this is what that means. Yeah.
So I mean, I'm consulting, and I work on a number of different projects, primarily in the cities and nature space. And I find this an area of unending fascination, how to reconcile cities with nature. And in fact, I would argue it's one of the greatest and most important endeavors of our time is to reimagine our cities as living, breathing ecosystems, and by extension, advance an ecological civilization. So I'm fascinated by the built environment and how we can integrate nature with nature-inclusive design principles, how we can basically green supply chains to reduce the ecological footprints of cities, and how we can create mixed-use, integrated, compact neighborhoods that benefit both people and wildlife. And I really do believe that our human habitats can work for people and wildlife. They don't have to be all concrete jungles. And we're seeing glimpses of a brighter future in many cities across the world. Ecological urbanism is manifesting in some of these iconic designs popping out of Milan and Vienna, and even here in Scotland. You might have heard of the Eden Project, which is also rolling out a massive facelift project in Dundee. Dundee is I think the fourth largest city in Scotland, and it's going to become, if the plans are enacted, one of the most biophilic, iconic cities in the world. So I'm very excited about that. So I work in the cities and nature space, but more recently, I've actually ventured into the world of the voluntary carbon market. And I'm
Yep.
working now for a company called Nature Broking. Nature
Yep.
Broking is a London-based startup, and essentially we help other businesses meet their climate and nature goals in ways that they can be proud of, using only high
Yep.
integrity, high quality, usually nature-based carbon credits. And I think it's a very exciting place to be working. And obviously, the voluntary carbon market took a bit of a, let's say, it's had some turbulent days over the last few years, but I can see the enormous potential to leverage and channel vast sums of capital into conservation. And that's what really excites me. And I think increasingly, with the net zero targets looming large, companies are putting their money where their mouth is and supporting natural capital. And so I'm very excited to be in this space.
That's really great. Thank you for that. And also sharing this latest passion of yours, because I want to just touch on what you mentioned right before that, which was reconciling cities and nature and bringing those back together, because the increasing awareness that we're not separate from nature, we are nature. I think this is a very interesting one.
Absolutely. I mean, there are very many different definitions of nature. One is that it's everything but me, right? Nature is the cosmos. Nature is even the constructions that we create. One could argue that our human civilization is very much part of nature. I think what many struggle with, however, is just the scale and the speed and the permanence of our human creations. Cities are the biggest things we've ever built, and they're here to stay for a very long time. And they're also sprawling across landscapes and disrupting ecosystems in a way which other species, even ecosystem engineers, could not possibly achieve. So there are reasons to be concerned. Also, of course, cities are sprawling into the areas which happen to be the most biodiverse, so the tropics, also low-lying areas like floodplains and coastal zones. But I think there is a really exciting opportunity to reimagine the built environment, and by extension, reimagine our very civilization. And I mean, I could talk at length about this, but if I may just conclude, one thing that really excites me is this notion that our buildings shape us. I think it was Winston Churchill who said, "We shape our buildings, thereafter they shape us." And I think that's absolutely true. But then you must ask, what kind of communities are we creating with our modern architecture and urban planning? And is that actually bringing out the best in us? Is it creating societies that are tolerant, respectful, and cooperative? Or is it creating atomized, lonely, and depressed communities that are fraught with friction? And I fear it's more often than not the latter.
Yeah. I hear you. And I think this is a very important issue for us all to pay attention to, is this reconsidering, redesigning. But before we go on that one, I want you to help build the bridge between the backcountry guide, the backcountry researcher, standing behind a tree listening to a lion purr, and a voluntary carbon market broker. There's a few years in between. Tell us a little bit about that journey and some of the choices you made, because the title is Choosing to Matter.
Yeah.
This is what I'm interested in. What were the choices you made? How you left the jungle? You left South Africa.
Well, that was in later years that I was in Nepal. I was actually researching in the Himalayas on park people conflicts. But long before then, a pivotal moment came when I actually returned from South Africa. And South Africa for me was really an eye-opening world of wonder.
The epiphany.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. It was a turning point. And in fact, I had such incredible experiences. I should just highlight a couple. One of them was visiting Jessica the hippopotamus, which is now famous. It's been on National Geographic, but back then it was just a few years old. And the farmer who had rescued this hippopotamus that had washed down in a flood, he reared it on coffee and dog biscuits. And I visited this local farmer. I'd heard about him from a friend, and I went along, and he allowed me to go swimming with his hippopotamus. And I remember putting my rather measly arms around its big, thick neck, its leathery neck, and it kicked off like Puff the Magic Dragon, and it was so buoyant, and it glided through the water. And then I remember him shouting at me and saying, "Oi, oi, don't splash her ears. If you splash her ears, she'll kill you." So it probably wasn't particularly safe, but that was one of those incredible experiences I had. And another was going to the Moholoholo Wildlife Rehabilitation Center and meeting this badger, this honey badger called, I think it was Stoffel, which also became something of a celebrity. And Stoffel was always finding very creative ways to escape from its enclosure, piling rocks upon the other to create steps. And I had these just wonderful experiences that, as I said earlier, cemented my desire to become a conservationist. But then when I returned to Britain, I had already enrolled at Bath University to study mechanical engineering. And I think it was probably about, 6 months in, when I was sitting in a lecture listening to something about moments of inertia. I can't recall, but I was really struggling to keep my eyes open. And I have huge respect for mechanical engineers. They play a very important role in society, but it just wasn't for me. I had a yearning to be back in the bush. So I left. And at the time, there weren't that many courses in Britain, at least, offering ecology. So I found one in Edinburgh University. And I remember informing my father, who was not happy at all. He wanted me to become a mechanical engineer. And I remember him saying that, you'll never find a job. You're a dropout. It's going to be very hard for you. I can understand in retrospect his concerns. He wanted the best for me. And he felt like I was making a massive, massive error. But that was, I think it was quite a brave decision as a young man to leave what would have been a comfortable career in mechanical engineering and pursue my passion at great risk in conservation. Little did I know then that the environment sector would rapidly professionalize and all manner of new opportunities would arise. And so I did my 4 years at Edinburgh, and that was an amazing degree. Studying is a privilege, and I relished every lecture, every textbook. I just lapped it all up. And the great thing about the ecology degree at Edinburgh is that we were able to go on these amazing field excursions. I went to Nepal, and I researched park people conflicts with the Royal Scottish Geographical Society. I went to Morocco and studied ethnobotany and the use of plant medicines. I went to, where else? To China, and I spent 3 months working on Dongtan Nature Reserve in a humid wetland where they were proposing to build an eco-city. Thankfully, they didn't go ahead because it was a Ramsar wetland site. But I had these fabulous experiences, which really shaped me and I suppose corroborated the decision I had made to become a conservationist. And thereafter, I ended up working in Brussels for a time. I worked for IUCN, which is the International Union for Conservation of Nature, a fabulous organization. I think it's the world's largest and most diverse environmental network. And then from IUCN, I got an opportunity to go to Cape Town, where I worked for ICLEI. And that was really the return to Africa, where I spent the next 8 years.
And ICLEI is an organization focused on cities.
That's right. And I must confess, when I left IUCN to work in Cape Town, which is a fabulous city, of course, but for ICLEI on basically urban nature, I was managing the global urban program. I felt somewhat sad that I would be far removed from the wilderness areas that I had basically fallen for. And very quickly, I realized that no, cities are equally fascinating. And to live on the slopes of Table Mountain, which is in itself a natural wonder of the world. And I was very fortunate. I had some Israeli neighbors who were very keen on hiking, and they took me into the national park almost every weekend, and we hiked up ravines and gullies, and we even camped on the mountain. And I developed a genuine dependency actually on Table Mountain. It became my church, my gym. It became so much more than just a national park. I used it almost every day. I eventually ended up working in Kirstenbosch National Botanic Gardens for the South African government. That's another story on biodiversity informatics. But I often say that to look at the fynbos is the plant kingdom, and it's the richest plant kingdom on earth. They say there are more species of plant on Table Mountain than there are in the entire British Isles. But to look at that fynbos through the lens of an ecologist is to gaze into the heavens through the telescope of an astronomer. It's equally
Hmm.
seductive and spellbinding and complex.
Hmm. Just beautiful. I can imagine. I'm just closing my eyes, imagining Table Mountain in the springtime with the flowers and the smells
Oh,
and
yes.
this rich life.
And there's a very special time at the end of October, early November, where in certain parts of the mountain, you need to know someone who can point you in the right direction. The mountain comes alive with fireflies. And it only happens on a very hot day when there's no wind, and you can climb up the mountainside, and suddenly, all at once, thousands and thousands of little lights appear, the fireflies. And it's one of the most spectacular experiences. Again,
Hmm.
another unforgettable experience. I actually went many times. I even proposed once among the fireflies. Unfortunately, the relationship didn't work out. But even so, it was a very romantic setting.
It worked. It was a movie, you know, it was a
Yeah,
natural movie in a sense. Yeah, yeah.
that's right.
I appreciate that.
That's right.
But then you came, so you, but from Italy, then you came back to Scotland at one point,
Yeah, I was
right?
away for
I
10
mean,
years. But actually, before I left Africa, I did something which I'll never forget and never regret with a very close friend, also a Brit, and my younger brother. We set off on our bicycles and cycled as far as Nairobi. Now, we wanted to go all the way back to Scotland, but obviously, it's a long way. And I think by the time we reached Nairobi, we were 9 months on the road already. I was running out of money and, frankly, enthusiasm. We were sleeping in tents, often in villages or out in the wild, and eating quite monotonous food. Actually, it was usually, I think they call it insima. It's a sort of starchy pap with beans and spinach, and it was that every day. But I do have very fond memories, and on that journey, I met so many incredible people. I was
hmm,
warned before leaving that I would die in thousands of different ways, but actually, the only experience I ever had with people was positive. People invited us into their
hmm.
homes, they fed us, and communities, rich and poor, across the length and breadth of Africa, welcomed us into their homes in ways which I hate to say it, but I can't imagine that would be the case in Scotland. If you rocked up at someone's house at 10 a.m., knocked on their door, and you were covered in mud and with a bicycle with all your belongings on it, I think they would call the police. But not in Africa. In
Probably,
Africa, I
yeah.
was welcomed in and treated like royalty. Sometimes it was embarrassing how kind and generous people were. The main danger, I must add, were the trucks, the traffic, and the pollution. They really didn't have any care for cyclists whatsoever. Um, but on that
Hmm.
journey, I guess the fundamental lesson is that, um, I mean, no matter how little you have, you always have enough to share. And that was something that
Yeah.
these people I met and stayed with taught me. And the other is that no matter how broken something is, it's never so broken that it cannot be fixed. And I really believe that. I know we talk about
Mhm.
irreversible ecological decline. Okay, that aside, we had instances where I thought my bicycle, which was shattered and completely, in pieces, would never be repairable. And yet we would meet with a local, they call them fundis, so mechanics, and they'd somehow weld it all together and put it back together. And it's that repair economy in Africa, the sort of circular repair economy, which I think we can learn a lot from here in the West.
And I think in what you just pointed out is it could always be fixed. It might not be back to what we had before, but it will be functional and different.
Yeah,
And this
yeah,
is in many ways when we're looking at regeneration or and sometimes conservation, regeneration, as the climate's changing, as our conditions are changing, we might not be able to go back to what was, but we can go to a new condition. It's like
that's
with your
true.
bike repair,
That's true. That's
right?
true. I have a good friend also who very sadly broke his back in a paragliding accident, and you know he would give anything to have his mobility back. He was once one of my fittest friends, so he would probably argue against that principle that anything broken can be fixed. But you're right; it can be modified and repaired in such a way that it still retains functionality. And just on that note, my friend, he's very inspiring. He promised himself that if ever he found his feet again, he would climb the 5 highest mountains in Africa. And he did so, under great pain, of course, with arthritis and all sorts of, nuts and bolts in his body, but he did it. And I think that was tremendously
amazing.
inspiring.
And it shows you we can do, when we put our minds to it, we can all do amazing, amazing things which we didn't imagine we could do, which
Absolutely.
is very important.
Absolutely.
So I want to ask you about your vision for the future, right? Because you, as a conservationist, in many ways, one could argue you're trying to hold something to what was, so that we can have something for tomorrow. Right? This is what we're trying to do: conserve.
Mm-hmm.
But as a futurist, I'm going to give you the title of a futurist. How do you see the future? What excites you about the future?
Gosh, there's a lot to be fearful about, I must confess. When I look at the state of the world today, and sometimes we have to guard against pessimism, because there is a lot to be concerned about, particularly now with what feels like increasing fractures across the geopolitical landscape. But I had the privilege. So I mentioned earlier, I ended up in Nairobi for a while, ran out of steam. But I went to give a talk with my buddy Stephen at the UNEP headquarters in Nairobi. And we basically sang some Swahili songs, wearing our cycling lycra and still half-baked in mud. And out of that very strange experience, we somehow landed jobs. And I was there for, in the end, 2 years in Nairobi. And during that time, I had the opportunity to co-found and coordinate this global campaign called Young Champions of the Earth. And it was a forward-looking prize designed to breathe life into the brilliant ideas of young environmentalists. And I had the opportunity to meet with dozens of young, ambitious, creative change makers. And for me, that was a source of sustenance and hope from which I'm still drawing from. And these were people, in their early 20s from places like Kiribati, who were developing hydroponics, agriculture solutions, to people in California who were finding ways to decompose microplastics. And the innovative potential and the idealism and the energy and the drive of young people is always a source of sustenance and hope. So that aside, what gives me hope is looking into history. And if you think back, of course, there have been horrendous chapters in our history, genocides and world wars, but the propensity of humanity to overcome when all the odds are stacked against us, the ability of humans to survive in the most hostile of environments. I went to Iceland last year. I cycled around the perimeter. I think I had something of a midlife crisis, and I had to prove to myself that I've still got it. So I went off on this bicycling journey with my wee brother. But yeah, it was pretty wild, like Scotland on steroids. But I remember visiting this very northern community where they lived in turf houses. And it was really on the windswept far north of Iceland. And I thought, how on earth did people carve out a living, and why, in such a remote extremity of the earth? And that fascinates me. It's our ability to endure. It's our ability to innovate and problem solve. And these are fundamentally problems with solutions. And the great advantage here is we have solutions. We don't even need to reinvent anything. We don't need to come up with cold fusion or wonders of science. We have everything already at our disposal. We just need to put the jigsaw pieces together in the correct way. And we can do it. There are pockets of success that are bound to tell the tale. We mentioned cities earlier. There are cities that are really transforming themselves in Europe with active travel and sustainable transport networks, creating beautiful parks that serve people and wildlife. There are pockets of hope. And yet, well, maybe I won't say and yet, but we could also have a very different discussion about causes for concern.
But let's stay on the positive one for a minute, because I think it's amplifying the positive is how we can also create ripples of change, and that can emulate and amplify. So give me a more concrete example of a place that we might not know about that we should. Because you said, hey, some really interesting places I've observed. Do you have any examples we should really make sure we're aware of?
A positive example of nature being
Mhm.
integrated into cities. Well,
Yes.
I think there are many. I mean, London is a very interesting case in point. London, which is in Scots called the Devil's Drawing Room, probably unfairly, London has undergone something of a transformation. People in London are very lucky to have fantastic parks. And one of my friends, Dan Raven Ellison, he started this National Park City campaign, which basically is trying to reimagine cities as national parks where they serve recreational
Hmm.
purposes and fulfill recreational needs, making them greener, healthier, and wilder. And I think London's doing a lot, with its ambition to increase canopy cover, improve access to green spaces. So it can be done at the mega city level. But I think also it's worth looking at some of the smaller cities around the world that are obviously expecting to incur or experience rapid growth, and they're trying to fix the problems from the outset. And if you look at the growth worldwide, urbanization growth, I mean, we're talking about areas, I think, the size of Ecuador within the next 10, 15 years of urban area to be
It's
created. And it's a fantastic opportunity to get it right from the outset, to fundamentally change the makeup of our society. I could rattle out a number of examples from cities. I mentioned Dundee earlier. Cape Town's done a lot. Of course, there are
yeah,
terrible social problems there with inequality, and
sure,
that creates a whole new set of
sure.
challenges, balancing conservation with social needs. But I think cities across the world are generally wakening up to the not just the luxury of nature as an accessory, but the imperative for nature as a fundamental,
Hmm.
essential asset in their development.
I appreciate that. I think that's at a city level. That makes a lot of sense, and literally dollars and cents or pounds and cents or whatever currency you want to say because of the health benefits, the nature benefits. What would you say that you're doing on a day-to-day basis in your life? The day-to-day. You wake up and you go to sleep on a day-to-day to the choices you're making that matter to make this positive future happen.
Interesting. So every day I try to be the person who I implore others to be. I try to walk the
Mhm.
talk, so to speak. I'm imperfect. I often make mistakes. Sometimes I'm a flagrant hypocrite, but I'm
Yeah.
aspiring to be a better person every day. And I think through our actions, we can influence others effectively. So I have a family who are, I would hope, more ecologically literate than they would otherwise be because of me. And that is important. I have friends who are more ecologically literate. And of course, I've also drawn education from them and they have shaped me. In fact, the Sai Baba, the Indian guru, said that show me your 5 closest friends and I'll tell you exactly who you are. And so our friendship,
Mhm.
our community matters. But for sure, I think, and I've often wondered whether environmentalism is something like a religion. It has its own creation story, its own end of days story. It has its high priests. What it lacks, perhaps, is a codified book of laws, how to live,
Mhm.
a book of laws for our society. But I think if we were to develop a book of such laws, the principles would be self evident. And they are waste not, consume only what you need and no more. Commit to lifelong learning about the natural world and teach what you learn. It's very important to teach others. Additionally, we should spend time in nature getting our hands dirty, volunteering in community cleanups or tree planting initiatives. And then finally, we must find peace in nature. We must use natural or semi natural areas as places of spiritual retreat where we can go and pray to whichever God you pray to, or simply be present and marvel at the majesty of the natural world.
Hmm. That's a perfect place for us to sort of wrap
Okay.
our dialogue. And those lessons, I think those, and I say that because those are really wonderful lessons, especially how you just said, every day I try to be the person I tell and I advocate others to be. And we are all imperfect, and how each one of us, as our choices that we make, have an influence and an impact, and we are all imperfect. But I try to be the best version of myself so that we can. I really like that. And I think the other thing is, you said there's always enough to share.
Mm.
And those who have so little tend to be those who share even more than those who have way too much. And I think this lesson is a really, really important one to take to heart. And I also love that idea of we can always fix something. There's nothing that's too broken not to be able to fix. And actually, I think nature shares that with us as well. When we see these unbelievable wastelands, which in say 5 and 10 years, 20 years, have been regreened, regenerated, and the charitable acts of nature towards us to allow herself to regenerate for us. I think that's amazing. And then the last one I'll just say is our ability to endure. And this is something which all of us have, and how we find that endurance. But I do have one final question, Dave. I have to ask you: are you still a bagpiper?
Yes, I'm still a bagpiper. I think I peaked probably about 18 years old, and I wish, in retrospect, I had joined a band. But sadly, they only come out now at weddings, funerals, and New Year. But occasionally Burns parties and St Andrew's balls. But I am still a strangler of the Wrigley octopus or the Caledonian cat. I can make it squeal. So yes, I'm a piper. I'm sorry to inform you, but only when sufficiently provoked with a wee dram of whiskey.
Well, I think that's a perfect place to have a toast. I think a toast to our collective futures. May they be what we hope they to be.
Cheers. Slanjabad.
All right, my friend. Cheers, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening today. It's really been a pleasure to share this story with you, and I look forward to seeing you again soon and meeting our next guest. And as always, do something today that makes a difference in somebody's life. Choose to matter.